if you look at this, you'll see a series of inspections, a series of things that of inspection reports that were specified. You'll see, man, this one really runs the gamut. Bluff inspection, chimney inspection, roof inspection, and this amendment, if the seller did not agree to do all these repairs that are mentioned in those inspections, could easily kill a deal. So if you're looking at it and you see that there's, basically, several different reports, the underwriter is going to expect to see all those reports. And then to top it all off, they said on line 19 that they're going to give a seller concession for closing costs and prepaids of $8,600. And that was actually because the seller, what the attorney did in this, and there was a real estate agent involved also. What they actually did was they were saying that if, based on all these inspections being done, here's what the seller is going to give the buyer in exchange for all the things that came up in those reports. And the scary part about this is that's not how it works at all. So these people basically would ultimately kill a deal if a loan officer didn't actually have the foresight to know how to proceed to get something like this to not be made a part of it. Because they're gonna research safety, they're gonna research structural safety, mechanical safety, and then they're also gonna make sure there's no environmental concerns like mold or something like that. So now that you've put this amendment out there, now you can kind of see how we're setting the stage. Does anyone have any questions for what they see in this amendment? Otherwise, we're going to shoot over to the outline. All right, can we go over to the outline then?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me. No, not that one. Hold on.
Yeah, we'll be getting to the common FHA repairs in a little bit. It's the one labeled best practices on inspection amendments.
Let me go back here.
Middle of your screen, I think.
Was it? Okay.
Best practices?
Yeah, there it is.
I'm going to bring it up here, actually. I think it was behind my thing at the top, so I couldn't get back there. Okay.
All right, now I had a chance to have a fairly long discussion with Kathy yesterday about some of the things that relate to where we begin with this debate, okay? And Kathy made a really good point. She talked about how when you're going to negotiate stuff in an inspection, to make sure that it relates to safety, structural, or mechanical, period. So this will require you to have a voice of reason conversation with your sellers or with your buyer, depending on what the circumstance is, that relate to them understanding the difference between cosmetic stuff and stuff that relates to those three things that we just talked about. So my first priority here is to be able to establish the cost of the repair. And then also I've seen some cases where we've had a notice of defect mentioned. We've asked for more time to establish a cost basis for specific repairs. I'd like to hear feedback from anyone that has had any experiences around how they went about getting to a resolution. Did you, if you're the buyer's agent, what did you do? Did you contact the listing agent? Does anyone have any examples or any good perspective around that?
Are you talking about, Bill, when we discover and know about the defect before?
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay, so prior to putting anything in paper, right?
Participation. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Prior to putting anything on an amendment and sending it over. Is that what I'm understanding?
Exactly. I'd like just to hear some people chime in around that.
I mean, Jen, you've probably had some. I've had some as well, where we send over the inspection report before we solidify what we're going to put on the repair amendment, so that the listing agent can share it with the sellers. and, kind of have an understanding of what might be asked for. And then that makes the conversation a little bit easier if you have to have a conversation before, putting anything in writing with the listing agent if you're representing the buyer. Is that what you're referring to? Or are you referring to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
what if-
agree with that.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Jen.
I would agree with that. We always, the moment we get the inspection report and radon results, we send that over with our buyer's permission, of course, right away to the listing agent so that the seller has time to digest it a little bit before we come back. And then Matt and I will have a conversation with our buyers about what's in there. I mean, we have a little bit of an advantage that Matt is a licensed home inspector. He does not do the inspections for our clients. He doesn't do inspections to get paid for them, but he keeps his license up. And then we have a really good working knowledge of what things might cost because Matt has also flipped homes. So we have a really good idea of how we can keep our buyers' emotions at bay. We always let the listing agent know that he also has that experience so that they have some comfort level that we're not going to nitpick. But what we ask for, honestly, all depends on how that first round went, right? So what did we get? Did we offer and get accepted 10 over asking? Or did we get it right at asking or below? That's all going to come into play depending on what we ask for, as well as what their loan program is. I just want to throw that out there. I'm sure we'll get to all of that, but that's how we go about it. There's so many moving parts that we have to take it all into consideration.
Absolutely. I'm basically also adding in like this whole notion of knowing what the posture of the listing agent and the seller is going to be. Because if you send back and you expose some specific defects in a transaction, and the notice or the notice is apparent to the underwriter and the lender that you had some issues that could be a detriment to the condition of the property, the underwriter is required to vet that stuff out. And so that's where we see this happen frequently, where a savvy buyer's agent will just get an understanding right at the outset and say the following things in an amendment. Here, it's really simple. And for those of you that are veterans, you probably already know what I'm going to say. Buyer hereby waives home inspection contingency. Seller to credit buyer X amount of dollars for closing costs and prepaid items. And that's all it says. You're just going to go with that. You're not going to open up a huge can of worms or peel back the onion too far where it's going to cause a bunch of questions to be asked. In the example that I showed you with that amendment, what we notice in there is they reference all these reports. When you put those reports in an offer to purchase, you've made them a part of the offer, and you're basically then causing an underwriter to have an obligation to see what all those reports say. Because once they're part of the offer, the lender is also liable for the outcome on that too, that anything that was a concern for safety or integrity is addressed. So that's where Roman numeral number 3 came in. Reconsider making an inspection part of the offer if the parties can't agree. And then like we were talking about, number 2, has the listing agent given any clarification on the seller's willingness to complete the repair? And Kathy made a remark yesterday that our best practice is always to try and get a licensed contractor to be doing that work. So do you guys all have a list of contractors that are kind of like your go-to contractors yet? Or, is anyone kind of like, do they have a roadmap and a path that they're trying to follow with that?
I think we all try to collect our vendors, but we do have access to, all 3 of the Keller Williams Facebook sites whenever we need a respected contractor for a specific job that we can recommend. But it is something that, all of us should have on paper in order to hand to our clients, for them to shop from.
Yeah, just a reminder that there is a Google sheet in our drive that is contractors and vendors that went around last year with different vendors in each category that you guys all have access to. So if you go to the Google Drive and type in contractors and vendors, I believe that will come up, and you guys can, you know, if you have good relationships with people, you can add to it, and then feel free to call anybody on that list.
Awesome. So basically, when we end up in a position where we decide that there are going to be some repairs that need to be completed, under number 4, can the repair be completed prior to closing? And it isn't necessarily always a repair either. It can be because weather is a factor. I've got a transaction right now where the property is new construction, and it's going to need a lawn, it's going to need a deck, and it's going to need some concrete work to be done prior to closing. But we can't do it because the weather's not working out for them to obviously do those things. It's very apparent that we're not going to put concrete footings in when it's below freezing and all that kind of stuff. So knowing that you are going to determine who's going to do an escrow agreement for you, and usually that's going to be one of the title companies, either the title company for the buyer's agent or the title company for the listing agent. And if Focus Title is doing it, just know that, you know, when we work with Lynn, we never have to worry about getting our escrow agreements done because she does a fantastic job with that. And she actually has legal counsel that can come in if necessary, if there's any questions about the language in an escrow agreement. But basically, we're not going to escrow for longer than 90 days typically. And we are going to require a cushion that's 1.25% to 1.5% of the amount of the scope of work. And very seldom can you get lenders to do escrows for interior work on any transaction because the lender will basically say, you just need to get it done before you go to the closing. It's really hard to get escrows done for inside work. It's also really hard to get escrows done for basements, basement repairs, septics, and other significant items. Amy, are you on the call?
I saw she was, but I don't know if she's unmuted. Or there is an Amy on the call. I'm not sure if it's her. It didn't have video.
So I did an escrow for a septic last year, and the escrow was for $18,000. And they said that they were going to finish it within 6 months. And the reason why is because if the ground is too saturated, the equipment that they need to get back out to do a septic replacement, after you have to perk out the soil and make sure that they actually can put a septic in the location that they want. Well, guess what? That septic never got installed even to this day. And this transaction was from last spring. So when you hear a lender say that they don't want to escrow for a basement repair or a septic, that's the reason why. Because ultimately it can happen so many different ways. In this case, they couldn't get the system to perk out properly, and and the soil test has to be feasible in order for them to do. My screen just went black on me. In order for them to do it, so in that scenario, we had a situation where basically they're going to have to possibly litigate the outcome with how that's going to play out. Does anyone have any other comments about experiences with escrow agreements?
Bill, just to reiterate, those should all be cleared with you if it's something that is proposed to make sure that the lender, if you're the lender, that you're okay in the processes to go through. Is that correct?
100%. Yeah, we're in a position where we are absolutely trying to make sure that number one, the lender is going to allow an escrow agreement, period, because there's a lot of investors that won't require them. And number two, we want to make sure that that the amount in the agreement is predetermined to be acceptable based on, a lot of times they want to get 2 bids. So here's another quick example for you guys. Because we all know everyone's got a bias, right, when they're having to open their wallet. Mm-hmm. So when you're in a situation where you're going to do an escrow agreement, they're going to want to see, the underwriter's going to want to see 2 bids on the transaction. And the reason why is because it's really simple. If you ask the seller and there's only 1 bid, who do you think they're going to get the bid from?
Well, the lowest.
Obviously the lowest cost, right? So that's why the underwriter's going to want to make sure that whoever's doing the work, that's vetted out. And then the other important part is to manage expectations around who's going to release the money for the escrow if one does have to be done. So the best example I can give you regarding something like that is if you're in a situation where contractor needs to be paid out at the end of the time the work's going to be done, let them know that they're going to send an appraiser back out there to complete the work before that money gets released, and that whoever put the money up for the cushion is going to basically get that money back, assuming the cushion money never had to be relied upon.
And that's the excess that you referred to of like 1.25% to 1.5%.
Yes, and the guideline for Fannie Mae is 1.25% the amount, but a lot of lenders from back in the day always used to want to do the old school way is 1.5 times the cost. So my screen went black on my laptop, so I quickly just switched computers. I'm back. Yeah, let's start to just go through the rest of the questions. I think we covered escrow agreements pretty good. Now, if you're in a position where you're going to get in a spot where the seller isn't willing to, again, I want to stress to you this notion that if you make a defect a part of an offer and you decide not to do anything with it because the parties can't agree, we're going to be in a position where we can't unsee what we saw. So I'm going to give you the easiest example, the one that's like the simplest. So we put a requirement to do a radon test in an offer to purchase. And the radon test comes in over 4, and the seller says, I'm not going to do the radon mitigation system, you're going to do the mitigation system. And the buyer says, well, I don't have the money to have the system installed. So what happens next? Has anyone ever had that happen?
Not that specific scenario, but.
So we have to remove the mitigation, or we have to remove the radon test requirement from the offer to purchase completely. That's what we would have to do. So in that scenario, basically what we would do is we would remove it, but only on the condition that the underwriter didn't see the test. If they saw the test and it was over 4, now we would be required to put a mitigation system in no matter what. And that's kind of a unsettling thing. So that's why it's really important that you cover your bases on something like that. Another thing that's happened, go ahead.
Does everyone that's on the call understand when he's referring to the test or the inspection report and the difference of what is written on a repair amendment? Does everyone understand, the distinction that he's making between the two? Because you write line items on the repair amendment of what work you want done, but in some cases, some agents have attached the actual report and sent it in. And so that's what he's saying. If the report goes in, then it's complicated because you can't unsee what they've already seen. And it could even make it worse to where they see things that need to be taken care of that weren't listed. I just wanted to point that out.
Now you're trying to differentiate deferred maintenance from items that require action immediately. So if someone gets I'm going to use the basement example again. I got to tell you, if I have a dollar for every single time the listing agent would say, oh, we're going to get a result back from the structural engineer, and they're just going to tell us that grading is the only thing that's needed. We just had a grading issue. The downspouts were not far enough away from the house. That's why we got water in the basement. So if you're in a position where you know that the seller is not going to, like there's more there than just grading, and the buyer still really wants the house, the seller wants to sell it, but they don't have the money to do the work. The buyer really wants the house, but they don't have the wherewithal to pay for a structural engineer, or let's say maybe what I meant to say is they don't have the money to pay for beams or, God forbid, excavation. So you have to decide how far you're going to peel back the onion, okay? So I send an appraiser out to that house. The seller can see a step crack in the foundation wall. The seller can see the wall is bowing. Now, they're not a subject matter expert, so what do you think the appraiser is going to do if they see those things?
They'll probably
I'll
just
give you
deduct it from the value of the house.
What they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, I think there's something up. I think you need to get a basement inspection, or you need to get a second opinion on the condition of the basement, because they're seeing a safety issue. They're not going to adjust for the defect in the case where it's something that affects structural soundness of the property. So the appraiser will basically specifically state that they suggest that there's an additional inspection. And I'm going to give you another quick example, because these are the quick hits that seem to come up the most. I go out and I look up at the roof and I see curling shingles, and I see shingles missing on a roof, and it's a conventional loan, not an FHA loan. The appraiser will call for a roof inspection to be done, and the guideline, the Fannie Mae guideline, is that the life expectancy of the roof is going to be at least another 2 years. Now, if you can't get anyone to put that in writing and put their name on their stationery to say that, you could run into a different issue, even on conventional, if you see curling or missing shingles. So those are areas where we need to be completely vigilant. Now, it may or may not have occurred in the past that an inspector went out, or excuse me, that an appraiser went out to a house that had a bad roof and there's snow on the roof. What do you think happens then? The appraiser says the roof is snow covered, and to the best of their knowledge, the roof must just be okay, and they move on. And I got to tell you, there's been a couple of appraisals that mysteriously happened during days where there are snow covered roofs, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. It has happened in the history, I can tell you. So, go ahead.
If the buyer is borrowing money also, they're required to have insurance. So not only from the lending standpoint through the underwriter, but there have been scenarios where an insurance person, may come out and say, I can't insure that roof. And then you're dealing with the same issue with regard to the roof. So what Bill is saying about roofs is just, always be cognizant and aware of when your sellers, if they have the knowledge, have had the roof replaced or, repairs done on it, so that you know what you're dealing with up front and have an understanding if it's, the original roof and the house was built 20 to 25 years ago.
Yeah, if you're in a position where you are going to try to put a transaction together where a buyer wants to buy and a seller wants to sell, just understand, to Kathy's point, that we've had instances where we had a hard time getting insurance. And the reason why we had a hard time getting insurance is because the underwriter for the insurance company or the agent took the pictures of the roof and they said, hey, this roof's nearing the end of its useful life, and now we got to try and find someone to get insurance for this. So the insurance agent is pushing the envelope with that underwriter at the insurance company just as much as we're pushing the envelope with the underwriter on our side too, because at the end of the day, we all want to serve our clients just so long as they know what they're getting into. So there has been occasions where the loan passed through financing, got to the closing table, and the buyer had an expectation that they had to replace that roof within 60 days of closing in order for them to actually get the deal or be able to buy the house and get insurance on it. So if you have curling or missing shingles on a roof, even on a conventional loan, I'd be very wary of that situation and just make sure you're vigilant about it from the outset. The golden rule regarding this stuff is, if you know a seller is not going to be amicable with accommodating a repair after a notice of defect is issued, get the listing agent's perspective first. Make sure you're just not going to be able to work it out with a closing cost credit where you're not going to open a big can of worms. Call them up and have the conversation, because it can kill the deal. And if that same offer to purchase goes from one lender to another lender because that first lender said, hey, this is not doable, it's not going to be a saleable loan. It's not, because the loan has to be ultimately fit in the collateral box for Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or FHA, right? So in that case, you can't take that same offer to purchase and go to lender B and hope that they're going to make it work. We have a lot of cases, guys, where we're seeing appraisal waivers on transactions now when there's over 10% down. So another important question to ask the lender is an appraisal going to be required on this property? If an appraisal isn't required on the property, we could be in a position where we don't necessarily have to be in that spot. So just know, if you can get it worked out where you're not going to have an appraisal done, that might be another alternative where you have an out. So as far as, let's move on to the next step, which is seller concessions, because I think we pretty much covered all of that stuff pretty well. So under seller concessions, was everybody that's on the call at the meeting where Amy and I talked about the max percentage of seller concessions?
Yep.
If you weren't at that meeting, please mention, or please just say so.
I'm not recalling it.
Okay, so Mandy, if I'm just gonna hit some of the bullet points, and then I can resend out, Mandy, I'll resend you out I want to look at you on my screen, not on my camera. I will send out the matrix that we put out regarding max seller concessions on a transaction for you. And Jenny says that she doesn't remember either. So we'll go ahead and I'll send it out to Jenny and to Mandy. If anyone else wants us to send out the concession matrix for all types of mortgages again, please send me a chat message or reach out to me. So if I'm doing a concession on a rental property for closing costs and prepaid items, the max concession is 2% of the sales price. If I'm doing it on a conventional loan and it's less than 10% down, the maximum concession is going to be 3% of the sales price. So that means, guys, that if some of my expenses for these repairs is going to exceed the sum of closing costs and prepaid items, what that's going to mean is that if I can't fit it into that box, I might need to seek a price reduction and a concession for closing costs and prepaids. And in that example that I showed you at the beginning of the call, where they had $8,600 in there, the reason why that happened is because they contacted me ahead of time and they said, hey, what's the max we can ask for? Well, in that case, the property to taxes were $12,000 a year, and we could work out a logistical way to get to that number based on the cost of insurance, cost of property taxes, and cost for closing fees. The last item you'll run into is asking for a rate buy down in addition to all those things, because what you first really want to see is you want to see the ability to use all the money, okay? So I made this comment, don't get caught at closing with an amount over the allowed credit. It's kind of like if we were going out on our first date and I said, hey, would you mind if we just go Dutch? Like, are we good? Because really what's going to happen is the seller is going to get that money back. The buyer doesn't get to keep it. So it's crucial that if you don't know the lender, and even if you do, every max seller concession is different for each transaction, not just because of the rules, but also because what the maximum is that they can allocate the money to be used for, if that makes sense.
Can I say something here? There's a lot that Bill is talking about that even seasoned agents might not have encountered. So I just want to say that, you know, when you have a preferred lender and you have a working relationship with them, that's your safety net, because you're not going to remember all this until it comes up again and you have a need to use it. So the point being is that, you know, Bill and Amy are available when you need to make sure that you're doing the best in terms of being a fiduciary for your client, and call and have these conversations and say, here's where we are and here's what we're looking at. What suggestions do you have? And then you can marry that with what your buyers have told you is important to them and they want, and then put it down on paper and feel confident that you've taken care of them and protected them as best as you can. So don't get worked up or concerned about some of this not making sense because you don't have practical application knowledge yet. It's an exposure for you to understand that. I guess the top line information that we're trying to convey is that the repair amendment and the negotiation after you're under contract is just very important. And you have your mentors to help you. You have myself and Jen, and you have your preferred lender that you have a good working relationship with. So reach out, you know, to all of those resources if it's not a straightforward transaction. And honestly, I just really don't know any transaction that's a straightforward transaction anymore. I just wanted to say that.
No, I agree 100%.
I wanna just-
Every transaction is so different, and I'm 4 years in, and I still call our lenders, and they talk it through me each time. You guys do what you do best and hire out the rest. That's the whole point, is to have your group of experts around you that can be that expert. And that's why we surround ourselves with people like Bill and Amy.
So remember the other golden rule that relates to what we were talking about. If you have an inspection report and the inspector that gave the report says that we need to do A, B, and C, and the buyer and seller agree that the cost for A and B is going to be all that we can do, but we're not going to do C. We're not going to fix that one last item that was suggested as a requirement. If that inspection gets made a part of the offer and the underwriter thinks that letter C needed to be done in addition to A and B, that you could have a problem. So just know, talking to the lender is crucial when it comes to, hey, this is what the inspector found. We did the drain tile test and it failed. We're going to need bracing and we're going to need grading. So they basically decided that they were only going to do 2 out of the 3 things. If the underwriter thinks the 3rd thing needed to be done to make the property safe and feasible, they will require it no matter what. So take that into account. I've had it happen where a structural engineer provided a report. The report specifically stated a list of things that needed to be done. And lo and behold, when they got Verret Construction to go out there and do the work, and they looked at the invoice for the repairs and sent out, you know, some verification to get the work, you know, proof that the work all really was done, they didn't do all the work. And that was a way for a transaction to get derailed. So validate all those things. We can move on to the number 2 under amendments. So we're gonna talk for about another, I'd say we'll go on for another 5 to 7 minutes regarding amendments and final inspections, because we have covered some of these things just through our dialogue, and then we're going to talk about FHA common repairs and have a little more time if there's any Q&A that anyone wants to discuss. So so I would like to introduce a few thoughts like that are best practices regarding your offer. Very frequently, we see an amendment or we see a contract comes in because of the way we e-sign documents now, and because we use .loop and a variety of different ways to get contracts signed. We see a lot of instances where contracts are not fully executed. We see a lot of instances where we'll have one e-signature and not the other. And we'll also have instances where we'll get an offer to purchase sent over to us, and we're the ones sending that offer to purchase to the appraiser. If the appraiser does not get a fully executed offer to purchase with all the counters, anything that's part of the offer, they will kick it back. They will say that we can't proceed until they have it. They also have an underwriter. One thing we haven't talked about a lot is what's going to show up in the real estate condition report. So if you have a scenario where you see something in a real estate condition report that you think could be a detriment to a transaction, just know that an underwriter is going to decide, is it going to be something we can overcome with a letter of explanation, something we can overcome with an inspection? Like they would say, I'll give you an example, guys. During the heavy rains we had in April of 2015, we had water in the basement, but we haven't had water in there since that time. Well, that underwriter might remember that time that we did have the heavy water in the basement and consider it an isolated case, since the appraiser went out there, didn't notice any moisture in the basement. There was no comments that were made about it further by anyone involved in the transaction. But if you have a scenario where someone says, you know, they're going to basically in full disclosure, note all known defects, right? I mean, as an agent, you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that that gets properly managed. So if there's anything that becomes a question, just know that the underwriter, again, can't unsee what they saw. Regarding amendments, if you are in a position where you're getting down to the 12th hour and you have repairs being done to a property, and the lender has not received all invoices and lien waivers, we're in no different position than you are from a sense of obligation to have that all be fulfilled. If we had work being done to a property and the seller did the work and we're not going to get a lien waiver for it, we really need to know, because otherwise we're expecting to see a lien waiver and we're expecting to see an invoice. And I've seen some invoices that look like they were written on a bar napkin. So if you're sitting in a cubicle in a real estate office, if you're sitting in a cubicle in a bank, at a mortgage company, what have you, and you can't discern the property address, you can't discern the work that was done, there's no way to really solidify what the cost was for the work. If you're not a party to the transaction and you're an underwriter and you're just trying to discern from what you saw in this invoice that it solidifies clearing the condition that was mentioned in the amendment, how are they going to do that? That's kind of like the rationale that I would like to introduce to like, say, your best practices.
So
we can't
can
just
I ask a
accept
question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so what if you're in a situation where it's a for sale by owner, and you know that for sale by, if you have the buyer, but you know that for sale by owner isn't agreeing to do any repairs with any invoices or lien waivers because he's got a buddy system of contractors that he's had do the work the entire time on the property?
Kathy, can you go first and then I'll go?
Like, is there a dollar amount has like a grace to that, or no?
Okay, if I'm understanding you correctly, the buddy did it, and so he probably didn't get permits from the municipality, is the assumption.
I would make that assumption as well.
Yeah, and I've actually run into that situation, and you get in trouble if you have a buyer, which I did, that called the city and asked specifically about that address, what permits have been pulled, and then uncovered that, you know, the floor where they took the hot tub out on the main floor, a permit wasn't pulled in order to do the structural work to, you know, put the floor back in. And it gets complicated and it can bust the deal. And the problem lies in that the city now knows about it, and if you get another contractor to come in, they have to, when they pull the permit, assume responsibility for what was done in the first place without the permit being pulled. And contractors typically don't want to do that.
Right.
In our situation, the city inspector for engineering in Delafield worked around it and by the grace of God, a day less than 24 hours before the closing date, you know, it was resolved. But you're at the mercy when something like that happens. And certain people, it goes back to what Bill has said, certain people have seen or are aware of situations. Will they or will they not work with you, you know, for resolution?
I know this much, Mandy. If you're not dealing with something that requires a permit to be pulled, like it's an electrical issue or a plumbing issue, something to do with mechanicals, I'll give you a great example. I had a scenario where I had some moisture damage in the ceiling in a bedroom from a roof leak. Okay, and the buyer really wanted the house. The seller didn't have the money to hire out a contractor to do the work. So the seller did get a family member to complete the work, and the buyer's agent learned that from the listing agent. So they said, seller at seller's expense to complete the work with on their own accord, and the buyer will agree to inspect 3 days prior to closing that the work sufficiently meets their expectations. Then the lender asks for a letter from the buyer that says that they understand that the seller did the work themselves and that they agree to the condition of the work that was completed as mentioned and as specified in the offer. So we have that happen, and we have a scenario where it wouldn't require a permit to be pulled. We're not going to force someone to get a licensed contractor if it's not a mechanical related issue to plumbing or electrical, something like that.
Okay.
And guys, it's important that you look at, you know, and understand and look at the hot spots on a seller's disclosure. So if you're representing a buyer or it's your seller, if you've walked the property, and one of the most common ones is they never check that, you know, upgrades or renovations have taken place that would add value to the property. And then you walk through and it has a brand new kitchen in today's colors with today's, you know, tile selections. And so you know that renovations have been done. You just have to pay attention to the seller's disclosure and make sure that what is indicated by the seller reflects what you're seeing in the house, and then address accordingly.
Absolutely. So let's talk about final inspections now as it relates to FHA, VA, and stuff like that. And then we're going to jump into common FHA work orders, which is one of the other attachments that we provided Jen. So so here's a little curveball that happens, guys. Your offer gets fully executed, your inspection contingency gets passed, and the lender forwards an offer with any addenda and any amendments to the appraiser. The appraiser sees in one of the amendments that some repairs were required. Is the appraiser going to look past that, or is the appraiser going to make the appraisal subject to the completion of whatever was mentioned? Which one will they do?
Subject to completion.
They'll make it subject to completion, and the appraiser will say that they have to go back out to the property at least 3 days prior to closing or what have you to make sure that that work actually really did get done. We have this happen even on conventional loans. It's the same thing goes with the appraiser. They can't unsee what they saw. So if the appraiser sees that an offer was subject to a known defect being corrected, and it's not like a basement issue, or it's not like an issue that they don't have merit validating the repair, they will want to go back out. Now, we have had a couple instances where we tried to overcome that, and how we did it was we basically said to the appraiser, listen, you don't know that this defect was corrected any better than I do because you're not a subject matter expert on this item. So we sent the appraiser an invoice and a lien waiver showing that this work actually really did get done, and then they cleared it without having to go back out to the house. So in the case where you have something that is subject to an appraisal, whether it be an FHA or VA work order, or a known defect that was described as something that had to be repaired prior to or after closing, we will send the appraiser back out there, and they will take pictures, and they will make sure that it got done. I have an interesting quick anecdote regarding this that I'm going through right now, and I have a second story entry door that goes out onto the roof of the house. And this happened to me 3 times in the last year or so. There's no draw latch, no way of like a permanent lock, and there's no railing out on the roof. So conceivably a kid could open that door, walk right out onto the roof, and fall off the roof or whatever. And I've got a transaction where the buyer wrote a cash offer in Whitefish Bay. The listing agent says, "You wrote a cash offer, we're not doing this work prior to closing." And the buyer says, "Well, it's a condition of my lender, blah, blah, blah." Doesn't matter. The listing agent and the seller say we're not doing it. So I basically had to get an exception from management because the appraiser noted it as a safety hazard on a conventional loan. The notion that someone could just open that door and walk right out onto a roof without a railing. So if you see any entry doors that go out onto a second story without any kind of way to make sure that the door is deadbolted shut, there's these security bolts that are like a floor bolt that'll keep it shut. I've seen various different examples, but if there's no railing out on the second floor roof there, just know that that's something that is very common.
Did you guys understand? He used the term, they wrote a cash offer, but it's financing. I want to explain that real quickly, just so everybody understands. They checked with the lender, and the financing strength of the buyer was so strong that they were not concerned, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, that they were not concerned that they wouldn't go through with financing. So the buyer, they wrote the offer without a financing contingency, so it presented as if it was cash. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's totally correct. They provide sufficient evidence to demonstrate that they could pay cash for the property, and they did that so they could get an accepted offer, but in reality they were really getting financing.
Correct. And so that's one of the things that's taking place out in the industry right now to get your buyer's offer accepted ahead of the others. But it's something that is pretty risky if you don't get, approval from the lender that there's really no concerns with this particular person.
Absolutely. So be mindful going in if you have a scenario where someone does have the ability to show that they can pay cash for a property, because it could be the thing that gets your deal done. I've seen instances where someone gave the seller the right to cure. They put up big earnest money. They gave seller post-closing occupancy. And I've seen someone swoop in and show their 401k statement and say, "Hey, I could pay cash for this house." Or better yet, they show mom and dad's IRA statement and they say they could pay cash for this house. And the reality is, so long as that they can get the deal done, the seller is not going to stop them, impede them from getting an appraisal, but they just basically won't let that be the way that they kill a deal.
Right.
And I have had houses, I did a deal last year on the east side of Milwaukee where the buyer did an inspection on the property, and they found out that there was a basement issue, and they wanted it after they said they were paying cash. They asked for permission to do a basement inspection because they wanted to make sure they knew what they were getting into. And it turned out that they needed to get a drain tile test, and the lady said, "You're paying cash for this house. I'm not letting you drill into my concrete floor to do your drain tile test. You can handle that after closing." So that's something you have to be really wary of if it ends up that you try to write a cash offer.
Yeah. So he told you the benefit on the front end. You got your offer accepted, and now he's telling you the drawback. They're basically saying, well, the contingency is not there and it's not a requirement for financing. So thank you, but no thank you. We're not going to do the repair that you request. It's a double-edged sword if you use that. So just a heads up.
can we go to the, if anyone doesn't have any questions, let's go to the FHA common repairs form.
Got it.
So Amy provided this form, and well, I'll send this to everybody that was on the call. I just got to make sure I get everybody off the list that was on here. I don't know, is there, Jen, is there a way to see who all was on the call today?
No, because some people just dialed in with their phone numbers. If they put their name on there, I can see it, but
All right, so
their phone numbers, I can't call.
I'm going to try and make this easy. If you send me an email, I will provide you all of these documents. And if you don't have my email address, just go to billthebanker.com and you will see my email address right on my page, right on my web page. It'll make it the easiest, because then I'll just send everything out to anyone that says that they want it.
Do you want
So,
to, in addition to this, Bill, do you want to include that concessions matrix you were talking about earlier, just so that it's included?
Absolutely. I have that handy, and I'll send that out also to everybody. And then if anyone has any interest in having any one-off conversations with me after the call, I do have some time this afternoon. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any scenario questions that we can help with. So we're going to try and quickly go through this form and give us, so we got 6 minutes left. Let's try to see if we can get through these, and then we'll go through any quick questions anyone has. So with FHA and VA and USDA guys, because USDA follows the same guidelines as FHA and VA does, we're going to be in a position that if you see chipping or peeling paint on a property, that's a common one, right? That's the usual suspects for what we see. What we don't, however, recognize is that when you're in a position where someone does not clean up the paint chips after they scrape and peel and repaint, you have to clean up the paint chips, because according to HUD, you might get your mangy loan officer to go over there and eat the paint chips off the ground, and there might be lead in those paint chips. So you got to be wary of making sure that those paint chips get cleaned up.
We've had to go back right before the day before closing with a vacuum cleaner to clean it up before we could get it. So it happens.
Thanks for backing me up on that. I appreciate it, Jen. And basically, if you're in a position, and I did say 2 years life expectancy, I have seen some lenders say 3 years useful life remaining. I haven't really seen it come up on appliances, but I have seen it come up on, I've seen it come up on floor coverings that look like they were completely shot and worn out, and I've seen it come up on roofs. So I had this happen to me last year where someone was trying to buy foreclosure property in Franklin. And this guy saw on HGTV that he was going to become a flipper. And he got all excited and he wrote this offer on the property. And we're going to save this one for another time. Let's just know that properties do really need to legitimately meet minimum property condition standards in order for them to even pass a conventional loan. So in this case, if the floor coverings are completely shot, like you can see underlayment through it, or you have broken windows, you have clearly you have siding even missing on a house, you can have appliances not there, but you can't have missing mechanicals. Okay, you can't have a toilet missing or a sink missing. And even on a conventional loan, you can actually have it where the property does not meet minimum property condition standards. It's kind of like if you're going to try and buy, like let's say you could buy a really fancy, expensive salvage Rolls Royce, okay? And at the end of the day, even though you could get it for a fraction of what it would normally cost, if the lender doesn't consider it suitable collateral, they're not going to want to use it as collateral, and therefore they're not going to allow you to finance it. So back to the outline. If you have any scenarios where you have anything like mold, here's what lenders love to say. You have that porous block in the basement, and you see these crystals forming on the outside of the block. Has anyone ever seen that before?
Yes, I had a seller that had it.
It's called efflorescence. Efflorescence is basically the salt coming out of the block. Well, some people like to call that mold, and some people like to insinuate that there needs to be a mold test, okay? So if you see efflorescence coming out on a concrete block and there's a bucket and some bleach nearby and that can be cleaned up, do yourself a favor and try to make sure that you take the best course of action regarding getting to a resolution if it really truly doesn't look like mold, so that someone who is not in the know doesn't freak out over it. So wells being capped and sealed by a licensed well sealing contractor. So if you have a well that is being abandoned and you follow protocol to get someone to abandon it that's proficient in doing so, that's great. There are these occasions where the property has city water and it also has a well that's not used for drinking water, okay? So if your test on your FHA or conventional loan does not require for a safe water test and that well is something that isn't being used for drinking water, there often is a way to work around that. Safety handrails, again, if you have an FHA or VA transaction, if you see a staircase without a railing, it's going to get called out. We are now in a position on VA loans where we have to do pest inspections, and I know a lot of the inspectors have been including pest inspections within their standard inspection costs as a value add. So just keep in mind that an inspection for a VA pest inspection could cost up to $125 if the seller doesn't want to pay it. They don't have to. In fact, here's something to keep in mind with the new WB11 offer to purchase, and this is probably a really big takeaway for you if you're going to do a VA loan. A VA purchase, I should say, because I'm thinking like a lender, I'm sorry. Make sure that you can specify in the offer to purchase that the buyer can pay for any inspections or tests in addition to paying for any work orders. That was something that got brought up as a best practice. Don't let the notion of who's going to cover your FHA work orders go unaddressed if you write a strong enough offer to have a horse in the race, if the seller or the listing agent would be causing an objection around something like that.
Hey guys, he's not saying there's two different kinds of inspections here. There are VA and FHA required repairs, and then there's other defects. And so what he's saying is that the buyer would cover the cost of the ones that are mandated by the government loan, but not the ones that are negotiated as a result of the general inspection. Those are two different things.
And the offer to purchase language now implies that it's standard procedure for the seller to pay for a pest inspection on a VA loan. I have no idea why they did that. Cindy came into my office, or I should say the office Amy and I share recently, and she said, hey, is this a requirement? And I actually got a little doubt about it. So I called the VA appraisal helpline and I asked them, and they said, no, that's no requirement that the seller has to pay it. The buyer can pay it. So if you have a VA transaction, you could easily specify that the buyer will pay for that. If you can't, on an FHA loan, if you can't run the water, and now I'm the only exception to the rule would be if you're doing a renovation loan. If the property's winterized and you can't run the water and you can't take a picture in the attic, you can't close on an FHA loan. They have to make sure that they have, Jenny made a comment that sorry to stop there mid-moment, I got shiny object syndrome. Jenny said, I'm doing a VA loan right now and we're using an inspector that offers a free termite test. So yeah, that's something, I think we were saying that a second ago, that a lot of times they're doing it for free. Thanks, Jenny. So if you can't get into the crawl space, if you can't get into the attic and you can't see that the water's running on an FHA transaction, you can't close. And the same thing goes with VA. They want to be able to see those areas. They have to take pictures of them. They actually literally take a picture of the running water and put it right in the appraisal report. So that covers the majority of the things on that'll come up on work orders for USDA, FHA, and VA. The one thing I would want you all to keep in mind is, you got me saying y'all, Kathy, that's not fair.
I'll have you all doing it. I'll have all of y'all doing it soon.
Yeah, so keep in mind one thing. If anyone has any questions regarding work orders for VA or FHA, I have hotline phone numbers for FHA and VA for you if it's necessary. If we ever have to call and get a subject matter opinion, because some lenders, honestly, their underwriters are not giving you the true legit guideline, the true rule. So if there's anything we can do to help you get the true answers, please let us know and we'll do it. Looks like some people are starting to bounce off the call. Do we have any quick questions as we wrap up here?
This is great, Bill. Thank you very much for taking your time to do this today.
Yeah,
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
very helpful. Just so you guys know, it's Kathy and I have been talking about this, and at probably late April, when we kind of know that things are starting to settle down and we can all be together again, Matt, my husband Matt, and his brother Tom, who's the owner of Buyer's Edge Home Inspections, one of our group coachings will probably be a field trip. We're going to meet at a house and go through a basement, you know, one where they can really speak to what he means by efflorescence and what you guys need to be looking for from the buyer agent's perspective and as a listing agent, like these types of things you can do as you're taking a look over the house before you list it. So that when you do get to this point, you know, with the lender and in, you know, inspection amendment negotiations, you guys will be that much more knowledgeable about all of these areas.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal. Thanks for everyone hanging out on the call with us today. I really hope you guys had some good takeaways. We didn't really get to talking about this this real estate condition report, but we're going to send it out to everyone, anyone that sends a request in. Just be super vigilant about what you see on those inspection reports so that you know if there's something on there that's going to get flagged by the lender and require additional questions, that you can address it early in the transaction instead of everyone becoming so emotionally invested that there's a chance that they could hinder the transaction moving forward because of something a seller disclosed.
And I am attempting something. When you first started talking, Bill, I pressed record. So when we're done here, I'm going to press stop recording, and I'm going to try to figure out what that link looks like. I'll email it to you so that when you email all of us, all of your attachments, we can put this link to the recording. Hopefully people can go back and listen to it if they weren't able to stay on the whole time.
Yeah,
That's phenomenal. I appreciate you doing that.
And those that didn't join in on it, they missed out because this was some excellent, excellent information.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hope you guys all stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye.
You, Bill. Bye.
Bye, everyone.